Welcome to Tales and Nails on Loud and Now Voice. I'm Rence Green, and today Susan Talbott tells the story of 2 years of soul-changing sandwiches.
So, my intention was to come home, here back to the East Coast, and get some professional theater experience under my belt, and then apply for graduate school. But in reality, I ended up succumbing to what I didn't recognize was the adult version of peer pressure. Thank you. Perfect. So what was the adult version of peer pressure from a screenwriter who I babysat for, but I hardly knew. So I end up moving 2 hours south from Santa Barbara, where I'd been for college, to LA. So I'm in a city that I really don't care for, and I'm pursuing this vein of my career that I'm really not interested in, and I'm working part-time selling maternity clothes on Rodeo Drive. And I actually couldn't even take advantage of the employee discount, which was really important, so that kind of stunk. But anyway, it was soon apparent that I needed an additional part-time job. Money was pretty tight. So I found one, and this one was working at the front desk of a small health club in Century City. Now, this club, to dispel any glamorous ideas about Los Angeles, it had recently been purchased by the Health Club LA, but it was definitely the quirky aunt of the company. It was had this really strange layout, and it was kind of precarious, but somehow in its glaring imperfections, it was oddly comforting. Now, our members were this eclectic mix. So we had attorneys, and we had retirees, and we had most definitely at least one aspiring ninja. We had this, fading from the limelight celebrities, and we also had these old Hollywood types who were now content to just spend the afternoon every day swapping stories, hanging out in the barbershop, and sifting through old copies of Playboy in the barbershop that was just right across from my desk. So there were memorable characters, to be sure. There was John Ritter, who, for the life of me, I could not stop calling Jack. That was his character on Three's Company. There was also Rodney Dangerfield, who could, in fact, not get any respect. But this apparently was for his very, very poor interpretation of locker room etiquette. And there was this older couple. They were really cute. And they would have these in-depth conversations across the lobby with one another, addressing each other as lover, yes, lover. And I'm standing there in the middle, like, hey, guys. And lastly, and most memorably, before I move on, but the most memorable member was one who, he was much older, retired gentleman. And every day he would come in, and he was fascinated by my knack for biblical trivia. Well, that's what I thought. He would quiz me every day until one day he handed me this note. He's looking at me deeply in the eyes, and he watches that I'm reading it, and it reads in all caps, "I want you." But thankfully, there were the other members who would just come in, seamlessly go by, requiring little assistance. And one such gentleman, a man of about 70, who came in every single day without fail, he stopped one day, and with this slight Mediterranean accent, he just asked me about me. So, where was I from? What was I doing here? How are things going? And in reality, things were not going well. I was broke. I was homesick. I missed my family. I could barely afford groceries, despite the fact that my agent was still telling me that I was still 15 pounds overweight. But most of all, I just felt really, really out of place. And the fact is I was. So I'm a Southern born and then a DC raised. I was still kind of a kid, really. I was 22. And I'm in this strange, fast-paced city with all sorts of rules that I don't understand. I don't even know if I want to understand them. I have no idea where I'm going or what my next step is. So I'm telling him something that's not that. So I give him this doctored and optimistic tale. But I realize very quickly I have failed to fool him, because the very next day he comes in, he stops again, and he slowly begins to slide this $5 bill across the counter. And he has this very kind and humble grin on his face, and he asks, "Have you eaten today?" To which I reply something that's not quite the truth, and then he replies, "Go buy yourself a sandwich." So the first few times this happens, and this was not a tipping job, and understand I'm trapped behind this huge U-shaped counter. Trapped. There's only one exit, and it's over there. So I follow him as far as I can to let him know that this isn't necessary. Truly, I'm fine. But that's not stopping him. So then I decide, okay, I'm just going to use this 5-second window every day to thank him. But then that's not stopping him either. He just keeps going. And so then I decide, well, maybe he just wants to know where the money's going. So I need to tell him, like, what kind of sandwiches I'm getting. So I tell him, hey, you know that turkey sub that they have? And still, nothing's working. He's gone. Because apparently, he wants absolutely nothing in return, not even a word of gratitude. And I have to tell you, something like that in LA is incredibly odd. It had not been my experience so far, and it meant the world to me. So this continues for about 2 years. And I will break that down. So that is, he's there every day. I'm only there 5 days a week, but that's $5 a day, 5 times a week, about 24 months. That is a lot of sandwiches. But despite this very, very kind and warm act, there's actually very, very little else that's going well for me in LA. And so I decide finally to come home. So I come home and I'm meeting up with my childhood friends, my dearest friends, and reconnecting. We decide to play tourist. So we go to the zoo, and then we go to Georgetown, and then we decide to also visit a museum. And this is a museum that's newly opened that we haven't been to before. This is a museum that would have had tremendous impact on me anyway, but especially so after I enter the final room, which is this indoor amphitheater. And there's this documentary that's playing, and it's comprised of personal interviews, and it's playing on this continuous loop. So I watch it a couple of times, because when he appeared, my quiet and generous friend, whose daily insistence that I go buy myself a sandwich, when he appeared, everything stood still. And then it converged at the same time, because we were at the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, and the film that we were watching was of survivors of the Nazi concentration camps. And I learned that as a Greek, Italian, Jewish male in his early 20s, he lost his family on near arrival at Auschwitz. And for 9 months, he was forced to serve. As one of the Sonderkommando, and if you don't know what that is, I encourage you to look it up, but be prepared, because these were Jewish prisoners who were forced to complete the most unfathomable tasks. And I never knew. All that time, I never knew. And so I was overwhelmed. I'm still overwhelmed. It's 25 years later. And I was overwhelmed, of course, with gratitude, and I was overwhelmed with this pain for him. I was overwhelmed with perspective. I was overwhelmed with really the power of the human spirit, which I had witnessed. And I was also overwhelmed by the privilege, of course, to have known this man, but not only known him, but to have had my life touched so positively by his own, to what began with one generous, and then nourishing, and then hope-inducing, and then now this soul-altering sandwich at a time. Thank you.
Susan, thank you very much for joining us.
Absolutely. I am thrilled to be here.
Well, I'm so glad to have you. So before we even get to the actual subject of the story, there's like 5 other stories that I feel like you could tell out of this story. Every little avenue, there's something more. So to start with, what is adult peer pressure from a screenwriter? How did you wind up staying in LA?
Oh my gosh. So I had just so fortunate to spend 4 years in Santa Barbara for college. And I was nannying for a family my senior year to just help cover some of the costs. And across the street from them, there were 2 screenwriters. And they also had a little boy, much like the little boy I was nannying. And so I really got to know them. And the mother, the wife, she was writing actually something for TV. And I told her about my plans to come back here to the DC area and get involved in the theater scene here. And because she was strictly TV and film, she thought that was outrageous. And she had a super strong personality. And so, just kept like pushing it. Well, if you're a real actress, you're going to go here. People who are truly committed to acting, they go here. And just, as a 21, 22-year-old, for whatever reason, I was like, okay, well, I guess she knows what she's talking about. And so I ended up in LA, even though it was like the last thing I actually wanted.
You definitely lived the Rent experience of the starving artist. And
oh my gosh, yeah. Like whenever I lived on baked potatoes and varying types of canned somethings, and maybe a little bit of cheese if I had a few extra dollars that week. So
fancy day. So I also want to ask you about the phenomenon of the LA Health Club, because these are sort of an old-fashioned thing. They're sort of a strange thing. So tell me about what a health club is.
So, well, in LA, at the time, there was this Health Club LA. I imagine it's still there. And that was a very glamorous, big something, where everyone went. And it was quite the thing. So that was not where I worked. So I was hired, and I forget how I even found it. I mean, I suppose in the newspaper, right? And it was called the Spectrum Club. And so the Health Club LA had purchased the Spectrum Club. They had been around forever. Yeah. And they were these very small, quirky, sort of renovated, sort of not, showing up in different places around LA. And just, I think the clientele was very different at the Spectrum Clubs versus the Health Club LA. And so in the Century City location, we had a lot of lawyers, and we did have people who were also in the entertainment industry. But it was interesting, just lots of different kind of characters that showed up every day. And oh my gosh, if Tails and Nails was a thing back then, I mean, could have been pulling left and right.
It's kind of criminal that you've only told one story at Tails and Nails, because I think just from this club, you probably have about a dozen more, it sounds like.
Oh my goodness, I could write a book, yeah.
Before we get back to your current story, are there any other stories that stand out from the health club?
From that one, let's see. And I mentioned this a little bit in the story, but the regular members who would come in every day, who worked, in the different the attorneys in the buildings nearby. Just their frustration with Rodney Dangerfield was really funny. Like, I would get lots of complaints where they'd come in and like, got to do something about that. Yeah. And I think he was just going back and enjoying, the men's locker room that had, it had all sorts of spa things, just the way he felt like, just being, but, a lot of our members were actually just, these quiet, corporate guys who were like, so that comes back. And I mentioned in the story as well, the barbershop. So where I would stand around this big welcome members in, there was a barbershop to the right. That was owned separately, and it was just, man, was it fascinating to see these old guys come in and sit around and swap stories. And, like I mentioned in the story, they're, looking through these old Playboys, and I just felt like I stepped out of time. I don't know where exactly or when, but that sticks out. I remember Ellen DeGeneres, when she was just getting started, there was a member of our club who she was interviewing for something. And so, she came in, and while the member was working out, kind of did a funny shtick with her. Oh my gosh. And then one more, I mentioned this to the ninja. Who was this guy? And I guess we see this all the time when we go to gyms, but, I guess being more of an artsy person who, just worked at a gym more than I worked out at a gym. There was a guy who would come in and he would just like flex in front of the mirrors, and he would just, good for him. He felt really proud about everything, but then he would do like all sorts of, and it was just so entertaining to watch him, like, good for you. But
yeah, there's probably some oddballs at health clubs in LA.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And one more,
Please.
Okay. It just came to me. There was a guy who was, and I should know his name. I can't recall. But he was, in movies, he would be cast as, a giant. He was just a normally very tall, giant man. I don't know his name, and I forget exactly where he was from in Europe, but he was actually a really dear member, because I think life was probably awkward for him, right? You just, walk around in a body that is that large. And so we developed a friendship when he would come in each day. Just tried my best to just treat him like, not talk about his height, not talk about anything. And so every now and then he would ask me if I wanted to have lunch. And so when I could, I'd say sure, or, and so there were different restaurants outside the center. And that was really meaningful. And he also didn't have anything else in mind that he wanted. He was just wanting to just connect. And, that was really special, actually. I haven't thought about that in a while.
Tell me more about, you didn't have much time to talk about this guy in the story. Tell me more about this guy. What was he like to be around?
So he fell into, though he never complained about any of the members or anything, he fell into that part of our membership of just, quiet, corporate, guys. There were women too, by the way, for some reason. The guys were more characters, I guess. But he just fell into that, just quiet. He's just coming there to work out. But he just had something there was just a goodness about him, even before, well, that happened very quickly. But when he started giving me that $5 each day for a sandwich, but he would come in every day. And when I say every day, I mean every day. He did not miss a day at the same time. His workouts were for the same amount of time. He would just come in quietly. A lot of the members sometimes would say, "Why do you have to take my card every day? You see me every day. What's the point?" I'm like, I can't explain it. Corporate wants us to do that. Please just, sometimes people give me a hard time. He wasn't one of those. He just, faithfully every day, give me the card, I'd scan it, give it back to him. Very quiet, polite, and I was always very curious about him. What is his story and who is he? And especially living in LA, I definitely met up with a lot of, wolves in sheep clothing, right? And he was not one of them. And so those people always stuck out to me and helped me feel grounded and just like, okay, I'm not crazy. The world's okay.
So did you ever manage to reconnect with him, or did you ever find out anything more about him?
Oh my gosh. So I did not. And I've been thinking about that leading up to today, about my many reasons for why that didn't happen. You know, the first being in the mid-ish, late 90s, you know, the internet just wasn't what it is now, though I certainly could have called the Spectrum Club and said, hey. And I think it was just something where it's almost like that perfectionist procrastination loop that would begin, you know, once I learned his story. Well, if I connected with him, and how would I be respectful, and would he even want to hear from me, given all that, you know, and I get started on that. And then by the time I would decide, no, you've got to find him and reach out to him, you know, then all of a sudden, you know, I had to go to work, or I had to, you know, and then I'd come back to it and do that same perfectionist loop. So sadly, I did not. And then I did learn that he passed away in 2020. And so I definitely missed my opportunity to do so. And I have, you know, I'm sad that I did not, just to thank him. And I did learn that he was 97 when he died. So he lived a very long life. And I have learned a great deal more about him since then as well.
Do you want to share his name so people can look up his story at all?
Yeah. His name is Dario Gabbai. And I did read, I believe he did have one daughter. And so as I'm even saying this now, I should reach out to her, you know, and just perfectionism be pushed aside, and just tell her what a dear, beautiful man, which I'm sure she knows her father was. Yeah, but I've learned much more about his story as well.
It's a big, I mean, when someone had that kind of impact on your life, it's a big, scary thing to try and reconnect with them, I think.
Yeah, it is. And you know, it's funny, I'm a therapist, right? So I have conversations all day long with folks about, you know, just communicating and doing things and pushing through things like perfectionism and, you know, different type fears. And so, yeah, I should do that.
So tell me more about, you have this moment in the story where you say you sort of stopped when you recognized this guy, and then it all sort of came together for you. I mean, tell me about realizing who this guy was and his story, and what did you, I mean, in that moment, what was it that came together for you when you saw that story?
So you know, the Holocaust Museum, it opened, I believe, in 93. And I was still in college in Santa Barbara at that time, and then I moved to LA for a few years. So I'm trying to think, it was probably 96-ish, 97 when I saw that film. I had moved. So I had not been to that museum, to the museum before that. I was with a couple of friends. And so you can tell even by the way that I'm like stumbling as I speak about it, it's still very emotional and impactful for me. So you know, you go through the museum, and it is such a profound and you know, overwhelming experience, or you know, where you're just taken in by everything that happened. And so that's the state that I was in. What I'm working up to is that was the emotional state that I was in already, right? Just this quiet, just remembrance, I guess, a reverence, you know, taking in, unfathomable, you know. So going through, and there's this amphitheater, and everyone's so quiet. You know, you go through something, and everyone's so quiet. Go in and sit down and watching the film, and you're not ready to leave yet. You know, you're still sitting with this and taking that in. So you're watching, you're hearing these survivors' stories. And I mean, I can see that room so clearly. I can see the colors. I can just remember the feeling that washed over me when he showed up. And in that same gentle, quiet voice was speaking about his story, without bitterness, without, you know, anger, without just the same, every conversation, quick conversation I would have with him every time I saw him, just this beautiful soul that was somehow, I don't want to say necessarily at peace, but I think was able to bring just some sense of calm that those of us who haven't, you know, I can't imagine coming to a place like that. But yes, I was washed over with almost just shock and more than that, but just gratitude. I was already so grateful to him to begin with, but then having all of this, knowing all of this on top of that kindness that wanted nothing in return that he gave to me every day for a couple of years, and knowing, where that came from, it just meant so much more.
When you did see him at the health club, what did you talk about? Did you ever have a conversation with him?
Just barely. A lot of the members, would want to talk. And that was okay. That was part of the job, and, but he just, he would come in, he was very polite. Hello and thank you. And here's my card. And, I was always ready, because I was also so curious about him. And, but even when he started sliding that $5 every day and say, go buy yourself a sandwich. And I would try, to get him to stay and talk. And he just, he would give me a quiet wave and a smile and head out. So really, I never learned much about him at all. Besides just the polite, exchanges quickly when he came in and left.
What a fascinating guy. I wonder if he ever had any concept of the impact that he had on your life.
Well, and this is one thing too I was thinking about. If he did this for me, how many other people did he do something so similarly for? I have a feeling that this was just his way. That he encountered people, especially people he probably encountered routinely, that he would offer these quiet kindnesses, to. Yeah, I'm sorry, and I just lost the question but I think, one thing that was interesting that I've read more about him, his gym routine, that was, I think, part of his healing. And I've read quotes since then where he talks about, and he's been in several documentaries. He connected with Steven Spielberg quite a bit, in documenting what he went through. But there is a quote that talks about, the gym was my therapy. Going to the gym and working out was the one guaranteed way that I could get all of it to just kind of settle. And so that explained why he was there every day,
What a time.
Yeah.
What a healing thing.
And even as I was preparing for the story, because now, the internet in maybe 96, 97 compared to the internet in 2019, wow, I was able to access so much more about him around the time that I was preparing for my story, which was another wave of gratitude and just, oh my goodness, admiration for this incredible man. And so I guess I would mention some of what I've learned about his story. I knew that it was Auschwitz that he had been. I knew that he had lost his family, though I did learn that two of his cousins and his eldest brother were also in the camps, whereas his parents and his youngest brother were almost immediately taken to their deaths. But I learned that he was selected and forced to be part of what was the Sonderkommando, who were Jewish prisoners who were forced to be a part of even leading people into and undressing before going into the chambers, gas chambers, and then also once they had been been murdered, he was part of, had to go and cut their hair, take their bodies into the crematoriums, burn their bodies, and then continue from there. And so he was forced to do that in 1944 for 8.5 months. And oh my gosh, how do you be forced to do something like that? And then he was forced to march from Poland then to Austria, and just, people were dying from the cold. And then right in 1945, they were liberated. As a therapist, as someone, a mental health counselor in psychology, I still don't have answers to explain how you go through something as traumatic as that and come out as beautiful as a human being as he is. I just don't. I'll spend my life trying to figure. It's just.
Did this story, did this interaction, do you think, shaped what you decided to do with your life after that, or did it change your direction? Or it's interesting that you have this question and you wound up as a therapist.
Yeah, that's a great question. You should be a therapist.
I don't know about that.
That's a really, yes, I would say yes. Right? Because especially given that my time in LA was not great, as I mentioned. I was broke, I was hungry. Of course I had parents who were loving, but I was trying to make it as my own as an adult. I met up with a lot of folks who didn't have the greatest intentions, and there were very few people, for whatever reason, who stuck out at that time, who were just kind souls who kept me afloat, who kept me from just, throwing out my entire worldview and deciding that the world's awful and creepy and can't be trusted. And he was one of those humans for me. And so I stayed afloat, mentally, emotionally, I stayed afloat because of him and maybe one or two other individuals that I encountered. And so, yeah, I'd say, yeah, he's responsible for the path that I continued on.
Interesting guy.
Yeah.
So preparing to tell this story, I mean, I think that the process of preparing to tell a story on stage for Tales and Ales can be kind of an experience on its own. I mean, tell me about even deciding to share this story. I mean, is this a story that you'd shared with a lot of other people? Is this a story that you shared with a lot of other people before?
I had. But, it's an interesting story too, because a lot of times when we're sharing stories, we're laughing, maybe we're drinking, right? And so you want to make sure when you tell this story that it is the right environment, because you really want to be respectful of the story. So yes, but not necessarily in casual, it's the weekend, we're hanging out, we're having fun settings. It was probably more one-on-one, when I would share with someone, because it was just so meaningful.
So what was the process of, in that time constrained environment, you have to kind of pick and choose what to include. What was it like trying to get a story like this that's so big and personal and you've thought about for so long, ready to tell in about, 8 to 10 minutes on stage?
So that is funny that you asked, because of one of the different things where we coach storytellers of things to do, maybe not to do. One of them is, please stick to 8 minutes. That's really important. And we know you want to include so many things. And if you look at the time stamp on mine, I was like almost to 12 minutes. So I did not follow my own advice. So you can see, to answer your question, yes, I struggled with that, what to include. Even when I listen to it now, all that matters really about that story is a brief explanation of the state that I was in, which was, broke, hungry, lonely, scared, super young, needed people who reminded me, oh, the world is good. So that part briefly, and then otherwise just about him. That was really just, so that's a hard thing to do. And especially, like you said, as I was researching and learning more about him, I could have stayed on stage for, another, who knows how long, just to share all the details that I had learned since. And that's interesting too, because, a lot of times we coach folks that our stories need to be our stories. And so we might weave in someone else's story, but really, that's his story. So I don't know if that's if it's mine to tell in that way on that stage.
Well, to your point, this is a story that could have only happened you met the right guy at the right time. This could only have happened at that strange point in your life where you're a starving artist, actor, and working at a strange health club where Rodney Dangerfield keeps acting weird in the locker room. This probably took some time to process. Like, this was a huge shift in how you saw this person. I mean, tell me about how this changed your inner relationship with this guy, Dario. It must have completely reshaped how you saw him and the whole events of all that time you worked there, the 2 years when he was buying you sandwiches.
Oh, it did. It took even what I thought I was experiencing and what I was surrounded with or not surrounded with, how I was supported or not supported during my time there. I mean, he was I guess it's almost like the idea of, there's an angel among us. And knowing how humble and kind and sweet he was, he would probably shudder to hear me say that. But, looking back, like here I was surrounded and had the presence of this angelic human who was in a way looking after me, like I said, keeping me grounded, because I saw him every day that I worked. And every day when I lived in LA, I had this feeling of, the world's not what I thought it was. How am I going to make it? Everything kind of, and then I would see him and it would remind me like, okay, things are okay.
How do other people react when you tell them this story? This is such he's known, right? He's not a Brad Pitt or a Taylor Swift or something, but his story is out there. You were able to find some more of it, and it's an amazing story. What do other people say to you when you tell them this story?
Because it is such a precious story. This has never happened, by the way, right? You share something like this that is so meaningful and powerful, especially. And if they're just like, oh, that's cool, that would be horrible. That's never been the case, I should say. So it is always, I think people are really touched by this story. And a lot of times people encourage me to, well, have you reached out to him? Have you? And then I have to, explain this weird procrastination, perfectionism loop I got stuck in. But yeah, it is a very emotional, I think, and maybe just like me too, where they had to sit there and walk away and go, oh my gosh, who was this man? And how did he get to that place? And who else did he touch? And, especially the way he went about it. I mean, isn't that a curious thing? I mean, he was intentional about it, but he was also intentional about not wanting gratitude, not wanting discussions to follow. So he just wanted, at least my experience with him, to go about and quietly do good and do that every day and then leave it at that. I think that's pretty profound.
And he saw right through you when you tried to put a smiling face on, struggling in LA.
Yeah, so that's the thing too. How did he know? Because, subtract, gosh, if I can do math well, subtract, right, like almost 30 years off of me right now. Like I look the same, I'm acting the same. Man, I didn't fool him one bit. Did not fool him one bit. And like I said in this story, I didn't tell him like, oh, actually, it's going terrible. I don't know what I'm doing here. I cry all the time. I'm lonely for the first time in my life. I live off a bag of potatoes a week, and canned chili. I didn't tell him any of that. It was just, oh, things are good. LA is beautiful. And, it's still adjusting, all of those things. And he saw right through it. Yeah. And it's interesting too. I did, he was about 21, 22 when he was taken from his home and when all of this, started for him. And so it's interesting to reflect on too. I was 22 when I met him, which is interesting. And obviously what I was going through, compared to silly. But then that's the other thing too. When you compare that he still had compassion, it would be so easy to say like, oh, kiddo, trust me, you don't have any idea, if I had been open about what I was going through. And even still, he had compassion and dedicated kindness. And that's just phenomenal. And I was hungry, but I wasn't, I had food, I had autonomy and free will and all of those things that he had been stripped of.
This is sort of a thing that you paid forward. I mean, you've gone into a profession that's all about helping other people, it seems like. Is this something does this shape you ever trying to pass that goodness forward in the world? Or?
Oh, it shapes. Sometimes people will ask me as a therapist, how can you hear some of these stories that people go through, and how can you sit there with it and still go home and still, and I think being part of what helps another human, knowing that you can do that, for me, that helps me get through that that's why, I almost get excited when someone tells me something really horrendous, right? And I think, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're telling me this. Let me be a part of this. I suppose, he went into it the same way. Sorry, I'm getting off point a little bit here, but yeah, absolutely that his kindness and the model of that kindness and wanting to help whatever the circumstances were, even if they were so different and less profound is what he went through. Yeah. I think I do carry that into my work. That gratitude, that pay it forward.
What a neat thing. Well, Susan Talbott, thank you so much for joining us to tell us some of the story behind the story from Tales and Ales.
Thank you.
And thank you also help organize Tales and Ales. So we've got another Tales and Ales coming up.
So the next show is October 4th. We have a pitch night, which will be August 26th, the Tuesday, at Loudon Brewing. And, to follow up this, I think this is important. A lot of times we have stories that are funny. Sometimes people get it into their minds that, only funny stories can show up. This is not a funny story. And so we love to have a mix. Stories are stories, whether they're funny, they're sad. They're a lot of times, right, there's a combination of all of that together. So, please show up. Please know that everybody has a story to tell, and you don't have to be professional. You don't have to have stage presence. Your stage presence is authentically whoever you are. And that's all you have to show up with. So we'd love to have someone there.
This is the cool thing about Tales and Ales. And I would say, I think it's an almost even split between really serious stories and pretty funny ones sometimes at the shows that I've been to. And I just went from interviewing Mike McGrath talking about a prank he pulled on his sister with his...
Oh my gosh. Right. Which, fabulous story. Fabulous story.
Yeah. She's still pretty upset about that one, I think. She's kind of angry at him still, it sounds like. So.
Which adds to the story even more, right?
Well, once again, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about this and sharing this story with us.
Thank you. And thank you for giving me another opportunity to speak about this tremendous, tremendous man who no doubt had such an impact not only on my life, but I'm sure hundreds, thousands of people.